Hey, Jay, what's going on, man?
Hello, hello, hello. How are you doing today, man?
Doing good. Welcome. Do we have other members of your team joining as well?
The only other member is going to be the same main account. I don't know if they've already requested permission to join as a speaker, but if you want to
Yep, I pulled them up.
um, pull them on, that's perfect.
Great. So, and who is on this A account, just so I can address them by their name?
Do you want to intro yourself to the account?
So here,
I think, yeah, I think we could go ahead and get started. I think it's Graham, but I think they might also be in another call right now.
yeah, no worries. So yeah, we will get started. And with that, Jay, I would ask, give us a quick background of yourself and how you got to be working in the Web3 industry.
Awesome. Well, yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. Super excited for this conversation. And I mean, if anyone has any questions, I think we'll be having an AMA later on in this, so definitely happy to answer those. Um, about my background, so I personally got into crypto back in 2017. At that time, my roommate, he was going through Binance Launchpad, so we worked on a few different projects together, and then afterwards, I ended up joining Robinhood. So I spent almost 4 years over there, saw the company 10x, and I was an engineering lead when the entire GameStop saga happened, almost 2 years ago now. And it was pretty crazy to be there at that time. I mean, honestly, it was not handled very well, largely because there was a complete lack of transparency from management around like what was actually happening, right? Um, and that really highlighted to me how whenever you have these super opaque systems, when things start to kind of go wrong, they can become very messy very, very quickly. And we've seen this play out time and time again, most recently with everything that happened with 3AC and FTX last year. And one thing that people don't realize is just how powerless you feel when you're an insider that's working at a place like Robinhood, because you put your reputation on the line, you put your career on the line when you've decided to join. And it's just incredibly frustrating when management is keeping you in the dark. And it's even worse when you're a lead and people are coming to you with questions and you don't have any answers to be giving them. So that's why, I mean, first of all, that's why I became much more of a decentralization maxi. Like after going through that experience myself, I started seeing how doing things on chain, inherently trustless, inherently transparent. So they would have resolved a lot of the issues that I personally experienced. And that's also why back in 2021, my co-founder and I started building a decentralized Robinhood. So that was originally going to be an exchange, and that led us down the entire path of building what is now Say. So yeah, great to meet you, everyone, and that's a brief overview about myself.
Right on. And where is the team located? How many folks are included on your team?
Yeah, so currently we have 20 folks in total. From the engineering side, it's mostly people from places like Robinhood and Databricks. So there's 9 of us on the engineering side, and everyone else is basically falling under two backgrounds. One of them is people like my co-founder who had spent time in traditional finance before. So he worked at Goldman Sachs and Co2. So people that have all the TradFi connections. And then people that have spent the past several years building in Cosmos. So for example, Dan, he's the head of ecosystem growth for us, and he previously was the CEO of Exidio, which is a project building in the Cosmos ecosystem. So yeah, we're currently completely distributed. We have a lot of people based in San Francisco, but we actually don't have an office. And I mean, we have like out of the entire team, I think 5 to 6 people are actually spread out throughout the world. So we have people in like France, Italy, Croatia, China, Pakistan. So completely distributed right now.
And Jay, let's jump right in at a basic level for anyone new to Say, what exactly is it and what can users do with it?
Yeah. So maybe I should also go over the story for how we actually ended up building Say. I think that would be helpful for painting a picture. So as I was mentioning before, we were originally trying to build a decentralized Robinhood. And this led to us investigating all the infrastructure we could use to build that, right? So we looked at every layer one, every layer two, all of the other infrastructure we could potentially use to build something like this. And that's when we started, first of all, that's when we started noticing that like the current infrastructure is not ideal. That's also when we started noticing the exchange trilemma. So the exchange trilemma is between decentralization, capital efficiency, and scalability. Every exchange out there right now is only able to get 2 out of the 3. So Uniswap v2 is able to get decentralization and scalability, but not capital efficiency. And Binance gets capital efficiency and scalability, but not decentralization. And we don't think that the solution is to keep iterating on exchange mechanisms. Like that's what people have been doing for several years, and we don't think the solution is to go from like a Uniswap v2 to Uniswap v3 solution to solve the exchange trilemma. Instead, we think that a rewrite of the underlying infrastructure is what is going to be the longer term solution over here. And this is how innovation generally works, right? There's this idea of application infrastructure cycles. So initially you have some new infrastructure that gets created. This then leads to a new class of applications that are enabled. Some of these applications find product market fit, and then you need to create more specialized infrastructure for these applications. So if you look at the database industry, originally there was the initial, generation of databases like Oracle that got created. This then led to all of the applications we know and love from Web 1 and Web 2, many of which at this point have found product market fit. So now there's more and more specialized solutions being created for these types of applications. For example, there's Databricks Warehouse, which is custom made for AI and ML type of use cases. And we think the exact same thing is happening with blockchains. So we started off, Ethereum was the first kind of general purpose smart contracting layer 1 that was created. This then led to, over the past several years, an explosion in all the decentralized applications that we've been using. And I think out of these decentralized applications, exchanges and stablecoins have found product market fit. A lot of other applications are still trying to find, are still kind of navigating their way around product market fit. But exchanges and stablecoins have PMF, and at this point, they need more specialized infrastructure to keep scaling and to have better performance and user experiences for their users. So that's exactly what Say is trying to build. We're trying to build that specialized infrastructure to help exchanges deliver better experiences for their users. So overall, our mission is extremely simple. We're building the best infrastructure for exchanges. And if we succeed, then we'll be able to help make the decentralized exchange trading experience identical to that of the centralized exchange trading experience. Yeah, so that's a high level about like our mission. In terms of what the product itself is, we're building a new layer 1 blockchain. It's a completely sovereign layer 1 chain, so we're not making use of any kind of shared security. And it's built with the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint core. So we originally got started using Cosmos and Tendermint. And then afterwards, we started working with Zucky, and we started working with Marco. So Marco is the product lead for the Cosmos SDK to push Cosmos and Tendermint to their absolute limits in terms of performance, in terms of like throughput, latency, and in terms of the things that we're able to offer exchanges that are building on top. So at this point, we've forked Cosmos, forked Tendermint, and there's 3 core innovations that Say has that definitely stand out. So the first one is Say has twin turbo consensus. So we wanted to help decrease the time to finality for any projects that are building on Say. And currently Say is seeing a 600 millisecond time to finality in our DevNet. And this is a magnitude faster than what you would see on other ecosystems. So for example, if you look at Solana, it might have a block time of around 600 milliseconds, but the actual time to finality ends up being closer to 3 to 4 seconds, right? And this is true for a lot of other chains out there. Like they might have a short time, or they might have a short block time, but their actual time to finality, because that chain is making use of a probabilistic finality type of consensus mechanism, ends up being a lot longer. So that's the first thing that we've done. We've added in twin turbo consensus. The second thing that we've done is we've added in parallelization. So Say is currently the only Cosmos chain to be making use of any form of parallelization. And this has helped us get roughly an order of magnitude better throughput than what you would see in other ecosystems. So we're seeing around 22,000 orders per second that we can process in our internal testnet. And if you compare this with other chains, they typically end up being between 1 to 5,000 orders that can be processed. So roughly an order of magnitude better over there. And the last thing that we're doing is we have a native order matching engine that is built into the chain itself. So if you're building an order book based exchange, you don't really need to do very much work at all. You can make use of the underlying order matching engine to create new markets and to help with the entire journey of like having a trade get placed, matched, filled. And the last thing that the native order matching engine also does is it helps prevent front running. So we're making use of frequent batch auctions under the hood, and this helps prevent front running. So yeah, that's a high level overview about the technical side of Say as well.
Can you explain in detail? You said Say is the only Cosmos chain that is making use of, is it parallelization? Is that the word used?
Yes.
Can you explain a bit deeper what that means, please?
Yeah. So the way that transactions would normally get processed on chains such as, let's say, Ethereum, is a block will be composed of, let's say, 100 transactions. And then when the virtual machine is going through these transactions, it'll first go through transaction 1, execute it fully, then go through transaction 2, execute it fully, and move on. So this is referred to as sequential execution. And sequential execution, I mean, that's something that we also observed initially with just computers in general. And then what people started noticing is it's actually possible to parallelize these transactions that are being processed, or to parallelize instructions in the case of computers that are being run. So in a normal kind of like Web 2 context, parallelization has become the default. Like everyone will just try to parallelize any workload that is there. The reason that it's difficult to do in Web 3 is because when parallelization typically happens, you're going to have different computers that'll be trying to execute these instructions in parallel, and that might result in them having a different final output. So with a replicated state machine, which is essentially a blockchain, you need to make sure that all the different nodes, all the different validators in the network, they're able to take a set of transactions, run them in parallel, and then get the exact same output. So that's what makes running things in parallel on chain a little bit trickier. But it does lead to substantially improved performance if you're able to do things in parallel. So an example of a workload that might be benefiting from being parallelized is if there's, let's say there's people A, B, C, and D. So transaction 1 is someone sending, let's say tokens from person A to person B. And transaction 2 is people sending say tokens from person C to person D. With a sequential workflow, you would have to run both transactions one after the other. But there's nothing really preventing you from running both of these at the same time, because they're not touching the same state. It's not touching the same person's account balances, right? So you can technically run them in parallel, and that's an example of a parallelizable workflow that would benefit and see improved performance on a blockchain like Say.
And what, I'm not a technical guy, but what prevents a blockchain that currently exists from switching over to processing those transactions in a parallel manner?
That would require a pretty significant rewrite of the underlying infrastructure. So if you're building with the Cosmos SDK right now, one thing that makes that a lot more difficult is the way that the application blockchain interface is constructed. So there's Tendermint, which is the consensus mechanism. There's the Cosmos SDK, which is running all the application logic. And what Tendermint does through the application blockchain interface, it'll only give you the transactions one at a time. So you're going to need to do a pretty significant rewrite to be able to somehow aggregate these transactions and then run them in parallel. Whereas in Say's case, we ended up using a version of ABCI++, which is something that the Cosmos and Tendermint folks have been working on for a while. And ABCI++ actually lets you get all the transactions in aggregate. And we basically took an alpha version of this, which they have since deprecated. And we just ended up fixing all the bugs and running a custom version for ourselves. But yeah, that's what makes it really difficult for any Cosmos project to be making use of parallelization right now. Like beyond just the technical complexity of adding in the logic for parallelization, the interface is also not really supporting it very well if you're using the latest version of Cosmos and Tendermint right now.
So the result of parallelization is a very fast time to finality?
Yeah, so the two big benefits of parallelization are that it helps decrease the time to finality. And the second big benefit is it increases the throughput. So in 1 second, you're able to process a lot more transactions than you would be able to process before, because instead of running them one after the other, you're able to run, let's say, 20 of them at the same time, assuming you have some kind of workload that is parallelizable.
Understood. Okay, and is the Say network currently live?
So we started working on started building the core protocol earlier in 2022. We launched a testnet in May of 22. And then since then, we've launched another testnet later in the year. We started our audits in November, and we're currently wrapping up the audits. And we're planning to launch on mainnet by the end of Q1 or early Q2 of this year. So currently not live, but there is an incentivized testnet that is running. So anyone that is interested in playing around with Zay, they can play around with it, play around with some of the projects building on top, and also earn incentivized testnet rewards for participating and helping catch any errors before the mainnet launch.
You kind of gave an explanation of the current shortcomings of AMMs, and I don't know if you wanted to shed some more insight in, well, you did talk about the order book landscape as well. I don't know if you wanted to expand upon those at all, if you wanted to move on from those, but are there any on-chain examples? Like, what do you think about Ethereum? How does Say compare to that? And then also, how does Say differ from DYDX?
Yeah. So Serum, for listeners that don't know, is an order book-based exchange that is built on Solana. I believe it has since been shut down because it was associated with FTX, and now they're creating OpenBook, which is the new version of a similar type of exchange. So Serum is a vanilla order book-based exchange that is built on Solana, and it, I think, was the first example of actually being able to build a central limit order book on chain that, to a degree, does work relatively well. The fundamental issue is that it can't really scale. Solana ended up having a lot of network congestion that was happening, and this ended up being extremely bad for people that were trading on Serum. Specifically, if you're a market maker, you've placed an order to, let's say, buy Bitcoin, or to, let's say, buy Sol for, back then it was like $250. So you placed an order to buy Sol for $250, and then the price of the market changed. Sol's price is now actually $240, but because of the network congestion, you're not actually able to cancel your trade. So your limit order is just stuck there on chain, and then someone else, maybe someone who's running a validator, will be able to get in a transaction to sell you that Sol at $250, even though the price is actually only $240 right now. And then you'll just be stuck losing money from that. That was actually something that was pretty significant and happening before. And this led to a lot of kind of just market maker unhappiness in the Solana ecosystem earlier. So I think that's like one of the first major issues that Serum ran into, just congestion. The second thing is with Serum specifically, they have this process of crank turning. So because of the way that Solana accounts and Solana transactions are structured, you can't actually have an order get submitted and then filled within one transaction. It actually needs multiple transactions to get filled. And the way that works is the user will initially place a transaction saying, I want to purchase this asset. And that'll get added to a queue. And then there needs to be an off-chain process that is running that'll then take orders from the queue and then have them actually get processed. So it's kind of a clunky approach where you need to have this reliance on off-chain entities. I believe before it was Alameda that was running these crank turning processes. I think it's probably someone else now. But that does lead to this off-chain dependency, which is not ideal if you want to be trading on-chain. And the last thing is there's not really any front-running prevention that is built in over there. In Say's case, we're making use of frequent batch auctions, and you can only support something like that if you have control of the transactions at the chain level, because all of the transactions are aggregated, and then you're making use of frequent batch auctions to fill trades at the same price. Whereas if you were trying to do that on-chain, you wouldn't really have a good way of doing that. Did that kind of make sense for the differences between Say and Serum?
Yeah, definitely. It was a quite intricate breakdown, and I'm just trying to take notes while I listen to you so I can retain what's being said.
Yeah. And the second question that you asked was around Say versus DYDX. So when DYDX announced, I believe it was June of 2022, that they were coming over to the Cosmos ecosystem, that was honestly a very, very interesting time, because before we were building in the Cosmos ecosystem, and a lot of people were concerned around whether it actually made sense to be doing something like that. As soon as DYDX announced, it completely changed the narrative around that, right? Like a lot of people just became substantially more bullish on the Cosmos ecosystem. It also became clear that there would be a lot more liquidity in the ecosystem overall, assuming DYDX is able to launch and bring over a lot of the liquidity that they had on StarkX. So overall, DYDX coming over is just very bullish for the Cosmos ecosystem. In terms of the approach that they're taking, so they're taking a very vertically controlled approach. So they're building the L1 chain, they're building the exchange on top of it, and they're also not, as far as I've heard most recently, they're not letting any other projects build on top of it. So everything on the DYDX chain is going to be controlled by DYDX. The approach that Say is taking is we're taking much more of a sector-specific approach. So DYDX is a pure app chain. Say is much more of a sector-specific chain. And I guess to give a broader overview, what we started noticing is that there's basically two main categories of chains if you look at the distribution of layer ones out there right now. On one hand, you have general purpose chains, so chains like Ethereum, chains like Solana. And on the other hand, you have application-specific ones. These would be chains like Osmosis, or I guess DYDX V4 would be another example of that. And the benefit of general purpose chains is that you get social coordination. So every project building on top is part of that same community, and they all help that ecosystem succeed. And if you look at the list of like the most popular projects or tokens out there, they're basically all general purpose chains, because building a large project really requires getting a lot of people on board and building a community over there, right? With application-specific chains, the benefit is that you're able to get really, really customized infrastructure for your specific type of application. So if you're building an app chain, the infrastructure that you're building is almost certainly going to be better for your type of application than it would be if you built on general purpose chain, because you're able to customize the entire chain around that application. So rather than going down either of these two extremes, the approach that Say is taking is called a sector-specific approach, and it's right in the middle. So the way that we're approaching it is we're just building really customized layer one infrastructure to build the best infrastructure for exchanges. And we're letting anyone deploy on top of it. So we're allowing a community to get built, similar to the general purpose approach, but we're also having this really specialized infrastructure that allows exchanges to benefit from that as well. And this leads to this idea of credible neutrality. It's the primary difference between Say and any kind of application-specific chain. Because in Say's case, we're not building any applications. We're just building layer one chain, and anyone who's trying to deploy an application, they're not going to have to compete against Say itself in order to succeed on Say. Whereas if you're trying to build, let's say, an exchange on any other L1 chain that is an app chain that has an exchange that is the primary app on it, you're going to have to compete against the underlying infrastructure as well. So I think that leads to one of the bigger selling points of building on a sector-specific chain. And that's why on Say right now, we have over 100 teams that have committed to building. 45 have already announced on Twitter, and the ecosystem has just had a much faster time growing than I think other application, or than you would see on most application-specific chains, just because of this idea of credible neutrality.
So, given the sector-specific approach and letting anyone deploy on top of it, you mentioned exchanges several times. Are there other types of dApps that are also eyeing Say or looking to launch on your network?
Yes, absolutely. So originally when we got started, and launched the initial testnet, this was May of last year. The projects that we're building were primarily exchanges that are really excited about the idea of having this really, really good order book exchange infrastructure supporting new types of use cases. Since then, we've started seeing a lot of other types of applications come on as well. I think the biggest reason for this is because exchanges have really strong network effects. And if it seems like there's going to be an ecosystem where there's at least even one popular exchange, it's very strategic to deploy a lot of other types of applications over there, because exchanges throw on liquidity, and then this liquidity can be used for a lot of other types of use cases as well, right? So at this point, out of the 100 plus projects that have committed, they're basically under like every category of application that you can probably think of. So there's a lot of DeFi based applications. There's a lot of infrastructure type of applications, for example, like wallets or like liquid staking providers. There's also some pretty different type of infrastructure getting created on Say. So one of the projects that I'll mention is called Nitro. And Nitro it's basically like Arbitrum on Say, and it uses the Solana C-level virtual machine. It's an optimistic rollup, and it uses Say for settlement and data availability. So that's one of the exciting projects that is building on Say. And I mean, the reason that I'm personally super excited about that is because I was involved in a bunch of conversations with Solana teams in the past, and they were excited about coming into the Cosmos ecosystem, but they didn't want to rewrite their smart contracts and get them re-audited again. So this allows them to just take their existing smart contracts and really focus on building the community and drawing in the liquidity rather than spending a lot of time on just building out the smart contracts again. So that's one of the projects I'm excited about. One of the other projects that I'm excited about is Cargo. So Cargo is prediction markets middleware that is built on Say. So Say offers this native order matching engine, and it's completely asset agnostic. You don't even need to be trading tokens on it. Instead, you can be just writing a smart contract where you define, okay, it's going to be a list of assets or a list of these like integers that is being moved around for order placement, order settlement, and order matching. And then everything else, like there's not actually going to be any tokens moving around. So Cargo is making use of this to build prediction markets middleware, and then other teams are building on top of Cargo to have kind of geographically localized prediction markets for their zone. So you might have like someone in India building a prediction market for cricket related games. And then in Europe, there might be other teams building like football related prediction markets. So that's another one of the projects that I thought has been very interesting building so far.
You've mentioned Solana a few times. What are some other layer ones that you guys typically go up against or consider to be major competitors?
Yeah, so recently it's been Solana and some of the move-based chains. A lot of the projects that are considering building on Say, they want to be building on a high performance chain. And I think chains like Aptos would be some of the other ecosystems that are considered similar. I think the biggest differentiator between all of these is the sector specific versus general purpose approach. With general purpose chains, you don't have anything built into the chain itself to better support exchanges. Whereas with the sector specific approach, you have frequent batch auctions, you have the native order matching engine, and it just makes it much easier for exchanges to scale on a sector specific chain versus a general purpose chain.
Are you guys working on any sort of interoperability mechanisms or bridges that will allow people from popular EVM compatible chains to bridge funds over to Say?
Yeah, absolutely. So Say we started off by building with Cosmos and Tendermint. And one of the really nice things you get with that is IBC compatibility. So Say has been IBC compatible from the initial testnet, which means that, so IBC is the inter-blockchain communication protocol. It allows for arbitrary passing of data packets between different blockchains. And one of the biggest use cases for that is to bridge assets between different chains. So because of IBC, Say already has the ability to bridge assets between every other Cosmos chain. And there's also been bespoke bridges that have launched on the testnet right now to connect Say with basically every other major ecosystem out there. So for example, Axelar has a bridge that is launched on our testnet right now that'll connect Say with Ethereum, Avalanche, and a lot of other chains. I believe there's multiple other bridges that have launched as well that'll connect Say with ecosystems such as Solana. So yeah, from day one on mainnet, there should be the ability to easily bridge over assets from other major ecosystems.
Jay, which well, actually, no. Let me take it back one. What does staking look like on the Say network, and why should users stake?
Yeah. So Say is a delegated proof of stake based blockchain. What this means is that to secure the chain, it's making use of a proof of stake approach, which is, in this case, is Tendermint. And what proof of stake means is that validators will be putting up basically capital. So they'll be putting up money, and if they do anything malicious, then they will lose a portion of the money that they put up. With delegated proof of stake, you'll have a small number of validators. So unlike Ethereum, which might have like hundreds of thousands of validators, on any Tendermint-based chain, you'll start off with a smaller validator set. So probably less than 200 validators in total. And each of these validators will be receiving funds from different users that are delegating to them. So someone might be able to take all of their, let's say holdings, delegate it to validator A, and validator A will not actually be in control of those funds, But if they do anything bad, then those funds will get slashed. So that user is trusting that validator to not do anything bad. Otherwise, there will be slashing conditions that are imposed on it. Let's say the validator does everything well, though. Let's say that they're producing blocks well, not really doing anything negative like voting for bad blocks. In that case, what the network does is there's this concept of staking rewards, which means the network will create new tokens and then give them to anyone that is helping secure the chain. So that's what staking would be in Say's case. If you have a Say token, then you'll be able to delegate that to a validator. And then the validator will be performing ideally good actions, and you will receive some kind of yield on the tokens that you staked. So that does provide incentive for people to provide security for the chain. And I think in the longer term, like in the short term, realistically, inflation yields, or there will be a lot of staking rewards, so there will be inflation for the chain. In the longer term, we don't think that will be the case anymore. We don't think that there will be high inflation rates. And we think that the incentive for people to help provide, like basically delegate and help secure the chain, is going to come from MEV redistribution. So there will be opportunities for neutral MEV on Say, and the value of these opportunities can be redistributed to whoever is helping secure the chain.
What are the hardware and software requirements for running a validator?
Yeah, so Say's hardware requirements are actually not super expensive by any means. We have the same hardware requirements as a chain like Osmosis, so we don't need any GPUs like Solana does. And in terms of the hardware itself, it's going to need, I believe we're asking for 1 terabyte of NVMe disk, and we're asking for 32 gigabytes of RAM and a CPU with 16 cores. So none of this is super expensive. And if you're trying to be running, like if you're an institution, it's like very, very easy for you to afford something like this. So the hardware requirements are pretty reasonable, all things considered. In terms of software requirements, I mean, there's not really any specialized software requirements. We're going to be putting up guides for how you can be running like a Say process, a SAD process on different, I guess on different operating systems, but it's not really super, I think, specific around the operating system you need to be using.
And I'm on the site right now on app.saynetwork.io, and I'm curious to know which wallets are supported by Say.
Yeah, let me pull that up right now as well. So I believe if you actually just try to connect wallet over there, it'll show all of the wallets that are there. And right now it seems like there's Kepler, there's Leap, I believe there's Coin98, there's Falcon as well. So there's an initial set of wallets that are already supported. And the nice thing about Say is that it's built, like it supports Cosmos.js, and it supports all of the other tooling that has been built for the Cosmos ecosystem. So it's going to be extremely easy for any other Cosmos wallets to be adding in support for Say in the future as well. But right now, basically every single major Cosmos wallet is already supporting the Say ecosystem.
Any plans for MetaMask, or is that already included? I just didn't see it as one of the supported wallets.
Yeah, so MetaMask isn't a it's a wallet that is meant for EVM-based chains. So MetaMask will be something that Say supports in the future. One of the things that is currently in the works for Say is supporting EVM compatibility. So the long-term vision for Say is we just want to build the best infrastructure for exchanges, and we don't really want people to be tied to a specific execution environment or programming language to support that, right? Like if you look at Web2, no one really cares about what programming language like Amazon or Uber or like Airbnb are written in. And like, I mean, no one cares, and it frankly isn't important. And I think it's going to be the same thing in Web3 in the future, where you're going to be having layer ones that are supporting multiple different types of execution environments and programming languages. So one of the things that is on the roadmap for Say is to support this EVM compatibility. And there's actually already been work done for that, but it's a little bit more complicated to add in support for interoperability between, like, let's say, Cosmosm and a EVM based message. So that's the main part that is a little bit more time consuming. So that will probably be something that gets supported after mainnet launch.
Do you anticipate there being a KYC module for institutional users?
So at the start, we're not going to be building anything like that ourselves, but it seems like there is a demand from a growing number of people for something similar to that. And the nice thing about Say is because we are building with the Cosmos SDK, in the future, we could make, say, a hub and then add in a different KYC zone. So it could make use of the same validator set, but everyone that operates on that hub could be making use of these KYC requirements that you were talking about before. So that's definitely very feasible to be building on any kind of ecosystem like Say.
I'm going to get to audience questions here in a moment, Jay. I have a few more from my end. How do you guys make decisions at Say? Is it left up to a few members of the core team, or is it something that is decided on from a broader range of individuals associated with Say? And also, what do you guys have planned for decentralization?
Yeah, so I'm associated with Say Labs. All Say Labs does is create open source software that is then used by anyone out there. One of the key foundations or one of the key entities using it is the Say Foundation. And the Say Foundation is going to be a decentralized decision-making entity. So I believe they will have more resources from their side around what the specific operating model over there is going to be. But in terms of the actual management of the chain, it's not going to be Say Labs being involved in that. It'll be the Say Foundation running that, and there'll be a set of actors that is responsible for coordinating the activities over there. I definitely think in the longer term, decentralization is extremely important for any ecosystem. At the start, like in any ecosystem that starts off like super decentralized at the start, it's going to be harder for it to iterate and harder for it to just build something that people want to use right away. So I think that most ecosystems that have taken off historically, they have started out more centralized. And then afterwards, there's been more of a push for decentralization once those ecosystems have gotten to a spot where they've had pretty substantial product market fit.
Sorry. So what's, and this is my second to last question. What is your long-term vision for Say? Where do you see yourselves in like 2 to 3 years? And how do you plan on achieving product market fit?
Yeah, so long-term vision for Say is to be the primary place where any on-chain trading activity happens. So, I mean, it's unrealistic to expect 100% of trading activity to happen on Say. I think that the future is going to be composed of multiple chains, not just one chain. So I do think that there will be multiple ecosystems where trading happens, but I do think that infrastructure that is customized for trading, if it does result in good exchanges getting built, will realistically take over a market share or a line share of the overall trading market, and a lot of the trading activity will happen in that ecosystem. I also think just in general, like these ideas of trustlessness, transparency, they are going to be permeating society in the future. And I think that having this like focus on centralized entities that are super trusted to be just required for finance to happen in general, I don't think that's going to be the operating model that will be there in the future. I think developed nations will take a longer time to move away from that model. I think a lot of developing nations where the current infrastructure is already not very reliable, I think that there will be a more quick shift happening over there. So I think in the longer term, there will be more trading that happens on-chain. I think Say is also going to be taking a greater share of that trading volume, assuming that we end up succeeding. And I think that your second question was around like, what does product market fit mean for Say?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so product market fit for Say, like we're essentially a B2B kind of entity. And I think that's true for every layer one chain out there, because people aren't coming over to a layer one chain because of the layer one chain. They're coming over because of the applications that are built on top. So in Say's case, I think the primary things we're focusing on are helping draw in very strong teams to make use of the infrastructure. And these teams will then be drawing in normal users, institutions, and that's where a lot of the engagement will come from. So in our case, product market fit just means drawing in good teams and helping them build infrastructure and helping them build exchanges that are then able to draw in more users.
Jay, how can people get involved with Say Today, whether it's a developer, whether it's someone that works on the BD side? Give us some insight into that, please.
Yeah, so the first place that you should go if you want to learn more about Say is Say's Twitter. It's already part of this call, so you can just click on the profile over there and go ahead and follow it, but it's just SEINETWRK. There's also a link tree over there with more resources, such as the Discord. One of the really interesting things that Say has happening right now is the Atlantis program. So the Atlantis program is a fully community-led program with over 2,300 people that are part of it right now. And they're helping push the Say ecosystem forward. They're hosting different types of events. There's actually a metaverse event that happened around Christmas time. So around a month ago, there were people that set up a Say metaverse, and then people were permissionlessly able to go and join that metaverse. There were also events that happened. There were 2 events that happened in Japan last week, for example. One that was co-hosted with DYDX, and another one that was, I believe, a fully Say-led one. But there's a lot of IRL events happening as well. So you can join the Atlantis community to learn more about, I guess, both participating in the Say ecosystem and learning more about the events that are happening as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. I want to pass the mic to Aisha for the first set of audience questions.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. So I can see on your documents the minimum recommended system hardware requirements, and it's written on your documents that Say is an order book oriented smart contract platform. It can at times be very demanding on hardware. Low spec validators may degrade the entire performance of the blockchain. I was wondering, how will you make sure that majority of validators are running node on high spec system, and will the number of cores required to run a node increase over time?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how do we enforce anything, that's not something that I have any control over. That's not something that Say Labs has any control over. What I've observed with every Tendermint-based chain that has less than 200 validators is that the delegations tend to go to validators that are running good hardware. There's a cap on the number of validators, so people tend to not delegate to validators that are not able to participate in consensus, because then you miss out on staking rewards and you will also get slashed. So what typically ends up happening is the validators that people delegate to end up being validators that are reliable. And I mean, historically, I don't think that's been a problem for any Tendermint-based chain that is launched within the past couple of years. So I don't anticipate that to be a problem with Say's launch. The second question around whether there will be more core requirements. It's interesting because right now, so one piece of what prevents scaling is around bandwidth. So just transferring bytes of data between different machines. And the second thing that prevents scaling is around execution. So taking a bunch of transactions that are there on your machine and actually updating the state of the blockchain with that. So for Say right now, we're not actually compute bound, we're bandwidth bound. So right now, like, the number of cores isn't really the bottleneck. It's being able to just transfer data between the different nodes. So at the moment, it doesn't seem likely that there will be increasing requirements around the number of cores on validators' machines, because the bigger problem is just being able to transfer data, and like increasing the number of cores isn't really going to improve performance at the moment.
Okay, so don't you think that developing your blockchain using Cosmos SDK and Tendermint Core can restrict your developer team to make modifications, improvements, and expansion of ecosystem in future? For example, number of validators.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I actually think it's the exact opposite. The Cosmos SDK is one of the most modular and customizable pieces of software out there, which is why there's so many completely different types of applications that are successfully using Cosmos and Tendermint to support their types of use cases. And I mean, that's exactly why we got started building with Cosmos and Tendermint, because it allows us to get something that is working and solving our use case out very quickly. And then afterwards, we're able to add in the customizations and make the modifications that we need to have more, I guess, to solve the problems that we start observing. So in the case of, say, originally we'd launched like the chain with the order matching engine built into it in May of last year. And then afterwards, there was more of a push on performance. So we were able to make changes and add in twin turbo consensus, for example, and add in parallelization, which led to decreased time to finality and also increased throughput. And that is something that was pretty easy to do just because of how modular the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint are. So I don't think that that is limiting at all. I do think that the biggest trade-off that we made, though, was with Tendermint specifically, the number of validators that you're going to have is going to be less than in an ecosystem like Ethereum. So that is going to be one of the focuses for the team in the future, to see how we can tweak the consensus layer to potentially support more validators. But to be completely honest, like I don't think that the number of validators is the most important metric to be looking at. I think the Nakamoto coefficient is probably a better way to gauge decentralization. So number of validators is a very, I think, straightforward idea. The Nakamoto coefficient is how many validators would need to collude to take over the network, or at least prevent liveness issues. So on Bitcoin, this is how many validators would need to collude for there to be, I guess, over 51% of the voting power that is controlled, or the mining power that is controlled by those validators. In Bitcoin's case recently, I think it was actually 2. So they're collaborate to take over the network. Ethereum's case right now, I believe it's 4. So it would need to be Coinbase, Lido, Kraken, and Binance that need to team up, and they'd be able to take over the entire Ethereum network. And I think that's a much more important metric to be focusing on. So in Say's case, there will probably be a cap on the voting power that each validator has to help enforce a higher Nakamoto coefficient than what you might see on other ecosystems.
All right, it makes me clear now. Thank you. Okay, last thing from me. Solana network has encountered series of outages, and these incidents specifically expose the adverse impact of the network's trade-off, sacrificing security and stability in exchange for speed. Don't you think while transaction speed is important, security and decentralization are just as crucial? What are your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think security and decentralization are critical. With that being said, I think there's 2 classes of errors that Solana, or 2 classes of things that Solana encountered issues with. The first is bugs, and the second is their synchrony assumptions. So in the case of bugs, like Solana was creating a completely new chain built from scratch, and because of that, there's going to be a bigger, like if you're creating everything from scratch, there's going to be a bigger blast scope or blast radius of the potential bugs that you can run into. So a lot of the actual outages that Solana experienced were just due to bugs. And these are just one-off issues that happen, and they're not a fundamental limitation of the consensus algorithm or of the execution environment. In Say's case, because we're making use of Cosmos and Tendermint, most of the code that we have has already been battle tested for the past several years. And if one super important case study to look at is Terra, right? Like even when Terra as an ecosystem was imploding, the Cosmos and Tendermint pieces of it remained completely reliable. There was no downtime around that at all, and like they were completely like secure through that entire process. So because of that, I think that just the blast radius for bugs that Say is going to have, because we're making use of Cosmos and Tendermint, is substantially smaller. So I don't think Say is going to be running into those same types of bugs. And the second thing is around the synchrony assumptions. So Solana has strong synchrony assumptions. Because we're making use of Tendermint, Say does not have strong synchrony assumptions. There's partial synchrony assumptions. That does make the network itself just less likely to run into issues around nodes being able to vote and like continue to build blocks on top of the canonical chain. So yeah, I mean, from Say's side, security, decentralization are critical. We're not really going to be also over there. Like, even with the number of validators that Say is going to have, the core ideas around decentralization of preserving trustlessness, transparency, permissionlessness, and also having a high Nakamoto coefficient, those are all going to be there from Say's side.
Yeah, thanks for the breakdown, Jay. I think she might have disconnected. I wanted to pass the mic to Venice, and then we can wrap things up.
How does a say market-based parallelization approach benefit?
I think Venice might be having some connection issues. I don't know, Jay, if you caught that or if it's on my end.
I was not able to hear most of it. I think the question was related to market-based parallelization, but yeah, I didn't catch most of the question.
Yeah, likewise. Venice, maybe reconnect or something. I'm not sure. We didn't hear most of the question. I can bring up Captain Levi, I think. Go. You can try again, Venice. Go for it.
Better or?
Not really. It's kind of choppy. You're cutting in and out. Yeah, Venice. Sorry, brother. We can't hear you. And yeah, it looks like there's some connection issues for multiple people that have questions. Jay, unless anyone else comes up with a hand, I wanted to ask one more question from my end. One more request. If there's anything about Say that we haven't talked about or discussed or I haven't asked, feel free to share with us. I don't want to miss anything.
Yeah, it looks like another speaker came on, so we can have the speaker ask their question, and then afterwards, I think one thing that would be interesting to talk about is frequent batch auctions, the front-running prevention mechanism per se. But we can go through questions first.
Cool. Yeah. Let's go with Rahmat, and then I'll try to get Venice in one more time.
Yeah, thank you, Noah. Am I coming clear?
Yeah, this is fantastic.
Okay, so I have heard you say in an interview that you will be creating a randomness in the validator ordering. So I was wondering, how will you be achieving this randomness in the validators ordering?
Yeah, so for context, one of the things that we were thinking about is basically is how to prevent multi-block MEV. So Say's frequent batch auctions help prevent front running within the scope of a block. So the way that a front running on an order book based exchange would work is that I submit a transaction saying I want to, let's say, buy something. Noah, you see that, and then you're the validator. So rather than submitting my order directly, you will add in two orders ahead of mine. So you'll place in an order to buy the asset, and then you'll place in another order to sell the asset to me at a higher price. That's how front running would typically work on an order book based exchange. Because Say makes use of frequent batch auctions, we can't actually have front running happen within the scope of a block, but it is possible to have multi-block front running. So in block one, you see my order coming in. So then you decide that, okay, I'm just going to buy the asset in block one. In block two, you place a sell order. So it'll be a limit order to sell the asset. And then block three, that's when you decide to include my order into a block, and you're able to have front running happen through that. What is required for that to happen, though, is for you to know that you control blocks 1, 2, and 3, or for like your friends to be controlling blocks 1, 2, and 3. So one way that you can prevent that is through having randomization of the block proposer. So basically, for every single block height, you randomly pick a new block proposer that is not known beforehand. So there are other chains that have done research around this. Algorand, for example, has done research into this around having verifiable randomness functions. Ethereum has done something similar with their RANDAO approach that they're currently using with the Beacon chain. In terms of Say's specific implementation, we haven't committed to any approach at this point. So there's something that we can really share publicly around that. But it will be some kind of VRF that'll be making use of different sources of entropy. And we're still figuring out details around that. But that will not be ready at launch. That'll be more for a longer term thing to prevent multi-block MEV in the future.
Okay, understood. I've also heard you say that you will be using DAG for achieving parallelization. It got me thinking that DAG and the blockchain are the different distributed ledger technologies. So how are you integrating DAG on blockchain DLT, or Say network is entirely based on DAG?
So in this case, a DAG is just a data structure, right? So it's just a way for us to represent different bytes of data that are there. In our case right now, like Say itself is a blockchain. But in terms of parallelization, the way that we approach it is we see all the transactions that are coming in. Then we see which state is being referenced by these transactions. And then we're able to construct a access list or a directed acyclic graph of all of the different transactions and how they're interacting with one another. And then different branches of that DAG will be run in parallel. So in this case, like this data structure directed acyclic graph is just used internally to represent the way that parallelization is going to work. But the actual network itself will just be a blockchain. So it'll be what everyone over here is familiar and used to working with.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so on your documents, it's mentioned about says Golang SDK to allow direct interaction with the sidechain. So can you tell us more about Golang SDK, and can applications also be developed on say network using Cosmos SDK?
So the Golang SDK is a way for different projects to be interacting with the core blockchain. In terms of what you can build on top of Say, so I mean the Golang SDK gives you tooling if you want to interact with the blockchain. You can also write your own smart contracts. So this would be CosmWasm-based smart contracts that are supported right now. And in the future, there will be other execution environments, programming languages that are built into the chain. But right now, you would need to be writing a Rust-based smart contract, which would be the CosmWasm smart contract, deploying that to the chain. And then you'd be able to either make use of the underlying order matching engine if you want to, or you can build more generic smart contracts for whatever type of application you're trying to build.
Understood. Okay, final question. I was just wondering, will you going to be incentivizing early investors after you have launched the mainnet who have been using the testnet?
So folks that have been playing around in the incentivized testnet, they will be receiving incentivized testnet rewards. To receive those rewards, you will have to go through a KYC process, but currently there is the Sainami incentivized testnet running. So anyone that is an early participant in the network, there are certain testnet missions that you will be able to perform. Once you perform them, you'll be able to submit it and you will receive, say, token rewards upon mainnet launch. So, I mean, everyone that's on the call right now, I'd encourage you to play around with the testnet and submit any feedback that you have.
Got it. Thank you so much for answering. Over to you, Noah.
Yeah, thanks, Rahmat. Venice, you want to try one more time?
Yeah, no. Yeah, is it better this time?
Yeah, so far so good. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Jay, I was thinking that in your opinion, do you think that Say's market
Venice, you cut out again, man. I'm so sorry. We're not able to hear you.
Perhaps it might be easier. Do you just want to send a message to me or Noah on Twitter, and then we could just read it out?
Yeah, Venice, shoot me a message on Telegram. We have a thread open, so just shoot me a message, and I can ask it for you. And while we wait for that, Jay, did you want to cover really quick if there's anything? I think you mentioned there's one thing you wanted to share with us before you head out.
Yeah. So one thing that I mean, MEV in general is a super interesting topic. In Say's case, the approach that we're using is we want to stop bad MEV and we want to redistribute neutral MEV. So MEV stands for maximal extractable value, and it's the value that a validator can get by basically being able to control which transactions are part of a block and what their ordering is within a block. So that front running example that I gave earlier, where I want to place an order, you see that order coming in. So then you insert two orders in front of it. That would be an example of front running. That is bad MEV. So the way that Safe prevents this bad MEV is through frequent batch auctions. So the way that that works is that with sequential execution of orders, you'll have one going after the other. With frequent batch auctions, at the end of a block, all of the orders will get aggregated, and that's when they'll actually be executed. So all of the orders will get aggregated together. Then a uniform clearing price will be calculated. So there'll be one price that all of these orders are executed at, rather than having, let's say, 10 different prices for 10 different transactions within a block. And then all of these orders will get filled at that exact same price. So because they're getting filled at the same price, it prevents there from being any benefit in changing your order within a block. And that helps ensure fairness for all participants within that block. So that's one of the really interesting things that we've been working on. And that'll help greatly improve the user experience and also prevent front running from happening.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to playing around with Say more. I honestly, Jay, until I messaged you and we kind of chat on the preliminary call. I had not heard of Say before. So kind of leads me to another question. What are some ways that you guys are marketing yourselves and generating exposure?
I mean, we're not actively doing any marketing from our side. So there is like in terms of like the entire Say network, there's like the Twitter presence and there's the Atlantis program. I think the Atlantis program is one of the bigger community-led efforts to raise awareness about Say. And as mentioned before, that's over 2,300 folks spread out all over the world, completely community-led program that is helping, I guess, raise awareness about what Say is doing. But I mean, from both the Say Lab side and also the Say Foundation side, there's not really been any active marketing that's been happening.
It kind of says a lot. You guys are making strides, and there's little marketing happening. Who knows how big you guys will be once you start to actually market and get eyes on an ecosystem.
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting because a lot of folks have been extremely enthusiastic just about the technology. We actually haven't given out any money in grant either right now. Most ecosystems, in order to draw in developers, they give out grants of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. In Say's case right now, there's been no money given out as grants, and there's still been over 100 teams that have committed to building on Say. So that's been super interesting to see. And I think one of the reasons for that is just because we're in a bear market, right? Like in a bull market, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of people that are mercenary founders that are seeking, that are very profit seeking. Whereas if you're building in a bear market, I think it tends to be much more mission-driven founders. And founders are also much more objectively willing to consider what is the best technology to be building their application on. And as a result, I think Say has benefited a lot, surprisingly, from the bear market, because we've been able to put our heads down, keep building, and a lot of founders have been receptive to the technology that we're building as well.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm not remotely as technical as you in different planets, but I'm able to listen along and grasp conceptually a lot of the stuff that you're describing. And I can maybe speak for Acti, who's on the main Whalecoin Talk account as well. And we just think that the tech you guys are building is really cool. And you know, the fact that not a lot of people have heard about you guys yet, or at least anecdotally from my, based on my circles, it means that you guys are, I don't know, I feel like you guys are going to blow up at some point. So not financial advice to anyone listening, but that's just my, and I really talk about the Say token too much either, but that's just my perspective based on everything that you've told us and taught us about Say. I was going to follow up with Venice's question really quick. Do you think that Say's market-based parallelization approach benefit NFT marketplaces built on the network? And can it handle the high gas fees that are associated with NFTs on other blockchain networks?
Yeah, so a couple of questions rolled into one over there. So the first question is around whether NFT marketplaces can make use and benefit from the market-based parallelization. The answer to that is yes. So Say has the native order matching engine, which is an asset agnostic order book that you can use. NFT marketplaces can make use of the asset agnostic order book to represent their NFT marketplace. And we've actually been talking to at least one project about doing that. So yeah, I mean, through that, there would be parallelization happening for all of the different markets that are being, I guess, that are making use of the order matching engine. So like one of those markets could be a Bitcoin spot market. Another market could be a Ether perpetuals market. The third one could be for that specific NFT collection, you could have a separate market over there, and they could all run in parallel. So because of that, yes, NFT marketplaces can benefit. The second question you had is around the gas fees that are associated with NFTs in other ecosystems. So yeah, that is definitely a interesting discussion. In Say's case, so these NFT marketplaces, the biggest, or the NFT mints, the biggest thing that they lead to is congestion. And in Say's case, there's two things that are being done to help prevent congestion. One is the global fee market. So people will be able to increase bids for transactions that they want to include. And I think that's the idea of a global fee market is not new, and that's been pretty battle tested at this point. The second thing that'll be happening is, I mentioned MEV redistribution before. The way that that would actually work is there would be private sealed bids happening off chain. And then whoever wins those bids would be able to submit transactions to be guaranteed a slot at the front of the block. So if you're trying to mint an NFT, you could just submit a prioritized transaction, and you would be able to mint that rather than needing to spam the network and potentially missing out on a spot in the block. So I think a combination of both of those things will help prevent any congestion and huge surges in transaction fees in the long term that are tied to any NFT activity.
Hope you're able to get that, Venice. I guess I had a follow-up question based on Venice's question, but just given the high throughput and short time to finality, Jay, doesn't that make Say Network prime for Web3 games?
Yeah. So the infrastructure is definitely it's going to lead to a better user experience if you have a game built on a chain with low time to finality than if you have a game built on something that is like 12-second time to finality, for example. One of the even more interesting things we're seeing though is people wanting to build rollups for games on top of Say. So with the rollup, like one of the really nice benefits is that you can have an even lower time to finality, or at least a lower time to finality from the user point of view. So you could have like, especially if it's a rollup with a centralized sequencer, you can have like Web 2 latencies in terms of what the user perceives around their soft finality. And then afterwards, there'll be a lot of things happening behind the scenes to be able to create a batch of transactions and then write that to the core layer 1 chain. But I think that's one thing that we're already starting to see interest from. And yeah, I mean, with that approach, you can have like really, really fast experiences for users. And then afterwards, there's these tokens that get created. And the primary use case for a lot of these tokens right now is either to be used in-game, which you can make use of on that rollup, or to be traded. And the perfect place to be trading tokens like this would be on a trading-focused ecosystem, where there'll be multiple exchanges that you can make use of to do different types of activities with these tokens. So either directly trading them on a spot exchange or providing them as collateral to be able to do something else on a different type of exchange. So yeah, I think there's going to be more and more gaming activity that is tied to the Say ecosystem in the future as well.
Well, Jay, it's been a great broadcast. You're incredibly technical, and I had to close my eyes oftentimes to keep up with what you were saying, take notes. But overall, I think it's been a very educational experience for myself and the panelists, or rather the speakers and the people in the audience. If there's anything else that you want to leave our community with before you head out, go ahead and do so now. But we'd love to have you on for future broadcasts. We host these Socratic style panels around hot topics in the industry, and I think you'd be a great panelist for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today. Would love to be part of future conversations as well. And if anyone's trying to learn more about Say, you can just follow the Say Network Twitter account. There's a link tree over there with a lot more resources, and you can start getting involved, play around in the Discord, play around with the incentivized testnet, and join the Atlantis program as well. So yeah, appreciate the time, and thank you so much for having me on.
Yep, thank you, Jay. And Whalecoin Talk community, again, my name is Noah. Remember, everything you hear on this broadcast is meant for educational purposes only. Nothing is financial advice, so be safe out there. See you on the next one.